Caesar, or as he's known by his own group, Caesar, son of Mars, the Roman god of war, co-founder and dictator of Caesar's Legion, a group that started as a wasteland tribal gang just like any other, but in time grew in size, territory, and power. What was once nothing more than a gang became one of the most powerful military governments in the entire wasteland, rivaling even America's greatest and most sophisticated government, the new California Republic. And yet little is known about the man himself, the man who conquered 2 whole states and then some in the American Southwest and brought the eastward expansion of the world's greatest government since the Great War to a grinding halt for over a decade. So today we're going to dive deep into the man, the mystery, the face of the Legion, and the devil of the Mojave Wasteland, Caesar. Caesar is a man who understands the power of myth, like men before him, George Washington, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Julius Caesar, the actual real one. Leadership sometimes requires a little myth building, and Caesar embraced this idea with abandon to the point where he tried to erase his actual history off the face of the globe entirely, but some things can't be erased. Some things are stubborn. Almost 150 years after the Great War obliterated society, in a place called the Boneyard, the name given to what used to be Los Angeles, California, a boy was born, squalling and red-faced as any other baby fresh into the world. The boy that would one day be Caesar, but he was not Caesar. Not yet. He was Edward Sallow, not the son of Mars, but the son of a man and a citizen of the new California Republic, which had spread through nearly the entirety of California by this point. The son of a man who died to raiders when Sallow was just a toddler, and so his mother, now raising him alone, sought solace. The world is rough for a mother by herself, so she found the Followers of the Apocalypse, a humanitarian organization, something we might now call a non-profit organization. The Followers have simple goals, but they are not easy ones: to provide humanitarian aid to the wasteland in whatever way that it can, to educate the ignorant, to advocate for pacifism, and to provide medical care where there otherwise wouldn't be any. While Sallow's mother cooked and cleaned to support her and her child Edward, the Followers educated and guided him into adulthood. The young Sallow was an apt pupil when he wanted to be, highly intelligent. He only dedicated his mind to things that he was passionate about, and, at least in retrospect, he considered the Followers' devotion to scholarship and peace both stifling and naive. Perhaps it was because of his acrimony toward the Followers that he was chosen for a mission to the Grand Canyon to study the local tribal languages, along with Bill Calhoun and a Mormon missionary known as Joshua Graham, a tribal dialect expert. Send the trouble far away where it won't get in anyone's hair. If only the Followers of the Apocalypse had known what they'd done the day they decided to send young Sallow off east. Perhaps they thought they were discarding a troublemaker, and how wrong they were. As they traveled, the group stumbled upon a cache of lost books. Among them were the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire and the Commentari de Bello Gallico, written by Julius Caesar himself. It might be said that Caesar was born that day. Sallow devoured those books, reading every page and devoting them to memory over the coming weeks. Sallow's studies were interrupted when his group was captured by a tribe known as the Blackfoot tribe to be held for ransom. The Blackfoots were not an amazing tribe. They had almost no power at all. Their numbers were small, and the people they did have were weak and uncoordinated, and they were beset on all sides by 7 stronger tribes. Sallow, knowing that if the Blackfoots were eliminated by rival tribes that he would go with them, was not content to just sit there and die. A glimmer of that Kaiser, born in him by desperation and intelligence, managed to take charge of the Blackfoot tribe. He taught them how to maintain their weapons, drilled them in proper tactics, and developed a strategy for dealing with their betters. When it was time, Sallow led the Blackfoots against their weakest enemies, the Ridgers. The training paid off, and the Ridgers were defeated handily, but they made a mistake. A big one. Like the tribes in the time of Shaka Zulu and the nations in Napoleon's, the tribes of the Grand Canyon underestimated the ferocity and tenacity of the Blackfoots under Caesar. In a world where war usually means few casualties and almost never their outright destruction, a conflict is, in a lot of ways, ceremonial. It's a game. Do people die? Absolutely. In the time of Napoleon, defeat was dictated by positioning on the battlefield. Were you the inferior commander? Everyone would know before a single shot was fired, and it was considered good form to retreat and offer spoils in compensation. In the time of Zulu, it was much the same, and like the opponents of Napoleon and Shaka Zulu, the Ridgers expected quarter, expected war to go a certain way. Like the opponents of these great men in history, they underestimated the power of total war, even when it was at their doorstep. And it was the last mistake that the Ridgers ever made. The Ridgers refused to surrender to the Blackfoots, and Sallow ordered their total extermination. Women, children, none were spared, and the Ridgers were wiped off the face of the world, to be nothing more than a footnote in Caesar's own commentary. Then Caesar and his army of Blackfoots marched on the Kaibabs tribe, which, when surrounded, also refused to surrender, and instead of an outright slaughter, Caesar showed that his aptitude did not end at the battlefield. Caesar instead showed his acumen in diplomacy and brought an envoy to the ruins of what was once the Ridgers' village, showed them the burnt hovels, the piles of rotting corpses. A clear message was sent. This is what happens to those who do not bend the knee to Caesar. The Kaibabs laid down their arms immediately and surrendered, knowing the fate that awaited them if they made the same mistake the Ridgers had. Then it was the Fredonian tribe that was next. One by one, each of the 5 remaining tribes made the same decision the Kaibabs and the Fredonians had. Joining Caesar's growing army, Caesar's legion, was the smart choice. It was not long before Caesar had conquered every tiny tribe in the region. As each tribe joined and swelled the ranks of the legion, a piece of Sallow was ripped away and replaced with the pieces of the myth that he was forging for himself. And as he stripped away his old identity and replaced it with the new one, he too stripped away the identity of the tribes he conquered. The disparate identities to Caesar was the source of their troubles, their conflict. What kept them from being one great army marching against the world was not their lack of ability, it was their lack of focus, lack of central meaning. So, taking another page from the Romans, who likewise attempted to strip their subjugates of their identity and hammer them into Romans, Sallow, now Caesar, stripped the conquered tribes of all their identifying features. No more rags, no more painted faces, no more braided hair. No longer did the Blackfoots, the twisted hairs, the Kaibabs exist. They were instead something else. A legion forged in the image that burned itself into Caesar's mind from those books he found on his way to the Grand Canyon. A legion modeled after the Roman Empire, marching under the great Caesar, not Edward Sallow, son born of a man killed by raiders and a woman who cooked and cleaned for the followers of the apocalypse, who was just a man, a mere human. He was now Caesar, son of Mars, the god of war, leader of the legion, whose right-hand man, once a Mormon missionary named Joshua Graham, was the Malpais legate. Bill Calhoun, the final follower, was released, allowed to return west back to the followers and the NCR to spread a message. Something is coming. A shadow grows in Arizona. In the decades to come, the shadow in Arizona grew as more and more tribes fell under the banner of the bull. And before long, Caesar controlled all of Arizona, New Mexico, as far into Colorado as Denver, and a decent chunk of Utah. No longer was he just a man controlling a tribe. He was a man who controlled a nation state larger than Afghanistan. It was one of the greatest nations to rise from from the ashes of the most destructive war civilization had ever seen, and 3 times larger than Italy, the home of Rome, the center of the very empire he emulated. It was then no surprise when the 2 largest empires in the world, both expanding, the bear in the west expanding east and the bull in the east expanding west, met each other. One, a democratic republic melting pot of regional cultures just like the United States from which it rose, and the other, an imperialist, ultra-nationalist, totalitarian, monocultural dictatorship. Ideological opposites. Enemies. When a diverse liberal democracy and ultra-nationalist totalitarian dictatorships bent on taking over the entire world and turning it into one single culture meet, there can only be one outcome: war. As Caesar expanded west toward the ocean and his territory began to swell against the confines of the Colorado River and the NCR expanded to meet him, they both collided violently. Skirmishes between the two broke out all along the border of the Colorado River, but nothing compared to when the bear and the bull met at one of the most significant living landmarks in the Southwest, a relic that survived, in fact, 2 world wars in its time and stood for over 3 centuries. The Hoover Dam. Still functional after all this time, the NCR were the first to arrive and entrench themselves, but the Legion was not far behind. And in 2077, Caesar's forces marched on the dam in open war under the command of the Malpais legate, the man once known as Joshua Graham, now a monster with a taste for brutality. However, while gifted at violence, the legate did not have the tactical genius of Caesar, and when the NCR, using much more sophisticated tactics than the tribes that had been the main military foes of the Legion up till now, beat a tactical retreat, the legate ordered his troops to follow. Thinking that victory was at hand, it was now that the NCR sprung their trap in the nearby Boulder City. Explosives had been planted in advance, hidden in the buildings of the small hamlet, and just when the Legion thought they had won, the NCR triggered the explosives, obliterating the Legion's forces and sending what remained retreating back east. Caesar, who would have seen this trap coming a mile away, or so he would like you to think, covered the legate in pitch and ordered him burned alive and thrown into the Grand Canyon as a lesson. No member of the Legion is safe from the consequences of failure, no matter how highly ranked. His most skilled forces and military commanders now dead, Caesar's riotous expansion westward was halted for a time, so he turned his eyes back east. Raising up a new man as legate, a man known as Linnaeus, the Butcher, Caesar and his legion spent the next 4 years conquering the rest of Arizona and incorporating the tribes there into his army. And it is here, finally, where we meet him in New Vegas, and knowing who he is, what his goals are, we can finally begin our analysis. Here on Devil's Advocate, we try to look at villains through a new light, to give a new spin, to learn the complexities of who someone is in a way that you may not have originally, particularly when examining them from the framing of the game itself. The original ethos of the show, in particular, was to actively defend every vile creature that we could justify defending, though I have to put this out there, some people seem to think that I was going to join the dark side and start Devil's advocating for companies like EA and all that, but no, it's fiction only. Fuck EA. Sometimes, though, villains are too vile to defend and have no redeeming characteristics, like the Umbrella Corporation. But I want to talk about them anyway, so that's what I'm gonna do. When a villain is defensible, I'll defend them. When they're indefensible, I won't. When I can, I will inject nuance in either case, which brings us back to Caesar, to Edward Sallow. I'm left in a conundrum with Sallow. By all rights, in almost any other game, he would simply be the main antagonist, a militaristic, expansionist dictator who has no qualms massacring an entire town on principle, and other things that we'll get into in a bit. But here's the thing. Fallout New Vegas is different from that. There's no main antagonist. There is a world with people in it of whom the character you play is just like any other. Like our world, it is a world of groups made up of individuals with individual motivations who cling together for an infinitely complex number of reasons. They bump into each other and affect each other in 1,000 different ways every second. Some have more influence than others. Some, when they bump hard. The player, you are one of these people whose actions are so impactful that they can bring peace between warring tribes and in turn the warring psyche within the burned man. They can launch nuclear weapons at cities. They can influence the outcome of not only a major battle, but should they choose, the course of everyone in the southwestern United States. Caesar is another such person who bumps and bumps hard. And if you choose to be diplomatic with him, as opposed to treating him like you got early access to the final boss of the game, you learn about the complexities of his motivations, of his history. You learn his contradictions, his hypocrisies, his fears, and his goals. Should you choose, New Vegas gives you the option to choose nuance in all its complicated ways. You can choose to sit next to the Walter White of New Vegas as he destroys the lives of everyone around him, and at the end of the day, Edward Sallow is just a man, just like any other, and New Vegas will let you see that. In short, New Vegas does my job for me, so I offer an alternative. Edward Sallow is the worst thing to happen to not just the Mojave Wasteland, but the entirety of the southwestern United States. I'd almost frankly be willing to say that the man is the worst person in the entire Fallout franchise, judging simply by how damaging he is to entire populations of people and the horrifying implications of his successes. There's the most directly observable crimes. He's genocidal for one. Everywhere he goes, he obliterates entire peoples and their cultures. Join my monolithic legion or be eradicated. This is done under the auspices of cultural stability in the post-war era, but the thing is, we've never seen the diversity of cultures be the real cause of conflict in Fallout. Competing goals, not competing identities, that causes conflict. Two parties that want to have unilateral claim over one thing having to duke it out, or two parties that strive for mutually exclusive things. You see this with the Institute in Fallout 4, which wants to keep its synthetic slaves, and the Railroad, which wants to free them, or the Brotherhood of Steel, which wants a monopoly on all technology. You see it with the NCR and the Legion, where they both want Hoover Dam and both want to expand into each other's territories. Something has to give. Then there's the slavery, something that's rationalized by Caesar in the same way it's rationalized by Ishmael Asher in Pittsburgh. It's something that's necessary to them in order to thrive. And here's the thing. It's not. Even in the extreme circumstances of the post-war era, we have definitive proof that slavery is not a required facet of society. The NCR, the Boston area, there are varying degrees of incontrovertible proof that you don't need slaves to survive or thrive in the new world. No, slavery is about power over others, exploitation, reducing human beings or otherwise to commodities. It's abhorrent, and there's no justification for it. In fact, it goes directly against Caesar's stated goal of long-term stability. Slaves will never be content to remain exploited people, ever. It's why they run, it's why they rebel, it's why the entire Civil War happened in America. Even synthetic people in Fallout 3 and 4, they run, they fight. Their enduring personhood is the cause of so much violence and instability in the Boston area area that it's just, from a practical standpoint, it just isn't worth it. And this ties directly into the inherent misogyny of Caesar's legion, which we gotta talk about, and there's no other word for it. Almost all women in Caesar's legion are slaves, save for a very small number that become priestesses. That's relegating half of the entire population of any area they conquer into eternal servitude. And what's more, the legion is destined to fail no matter their military conquests, their successes, their dominance. No matter how far they get in the southwest, the legion is on a ticking clock. The legion is held together by the will and charisma of Caesar, and it's made clear via the rivalry between Linnaeus and the Vulpes Inculta that should Caesar die, the legion will be fractured. It will split in two, possibly three pieces, factions, not a unified group that will undoubtedly be at war with each other, and without a unified single entity to hold them together as one unit, they will be ripe pickings for the NCR to take them down, one by one in this weakened state. Edward Sallow, born a man, shaped himself into a legend, a project for his own vanity, his own ego. A man who, like many other single-minded leaders before him, built an empire that will not survive him. Like Alexander the Great's, Napoleon's, Genghis Khan's will fracture and crumble to dust the instant his legend dies with him. There's no denying that Sallow, Caesar, is a great man, a terrible one in all the ways those words can be used. A man who pushed, whose very movements made ripples throughout the world and history. A devil in the West. At the end of the day, even the world's greatest legends are just men, flawed and foolish. Some are monsters, and some are said to be monsters. In the end, the legends don't matter. You cannot control them from the grave. What matters is what you do with the time you have on this planet, what you do with the control that you have. You can choose to be a monster, or you can choose to be something else. Hey there everyone, thank you for waiting ages for this second Devil's Advocate video. As I kind of talked about a little bit earlier in the video, I kind of ran into this issue where I wanted to talk about different franchises and different games, and I was having trouble thinking about like how would I rationalize defending a certain person that I really thought, or organization I thought was really indefensible. Resident Evil, Umbrella Corporation really was the one that made me go, I don't know how I can do this, but there's a bunch of others. And so Devil's Advocate's really gonna be more of a, I think from now on, more of a villain analyzing type show. A lot of times I think that will be me defending people, but I think Caesar's just not a very good person, and I think the power that he got revealed who he is, and I don't like who he is. He doesn't use his power well. He uses it to exploit others and to cause harm and to satisfy his own ego, and I don't think those are responsible ways to use power. And anyway, I want to throw a shout out to my patrons who make this show and this channel possible. You guys are amazing, and we're gonna have a little bit of a live stream afterward. If you want to stick around and watch that, we're going to be discussing this episode a little bit more, and you'll get your chance to make your case for Caesar and Edward Sallow. Just be nice, please. This is fiction, and this is not a real person, so there's no reason to be mean about it. These are just my opinions, and I think, you can have your opinions, and let's talk about them. Let's do that.